Kneel? A duke does not kneel, and certainly not for a woman the whole county calls a spinster. The words carried across the ballroom of Fallowmere, spoken by Lady Prescott behind her painted fan, and Julian Hartwell, 7th Duke of Fallowmere, heard every one of them. He stood at the top of the marble steps, gloved hand resting on the balustrade, and watched the woman they were speaking of. She was seated alone near the tall windows, a plate of untouched supper on her knee, her spine straight as a Sunday sermon. Her 3 younger sisters spun past her in the arms of their lordly husbands, silken laughter, and not one of them glanced her way. Her name was Eleanor Wood. She was 29, and Julian had thought of little else for a fortnight. He had met her by accident. His carriage had thrown a wheel on the woad land, and while his men laboured in the ditch, he had walked up the lane to beg the loan of a horse, and found her in the kitchen garden with mud on her hem, and a dead man's ledger open on the wall beside her. She had been doing the accounts her father no longer could. She had spoken to Julian as though he were merely a traveller, plain and dusty as he was, and she had told him, laughing, that the wisest thing a woman could do was to expect nothing from anyone, and thereby never be disappointed. He had ridden away, turning that sentence over like a coin. Now, at her family's own ball, they had seated her in the corner like a chaperone. They say the father squandered it all. Lady Prescott went on. The sisters married well only because Eleanor gave up her own portion to dower them. Fool of a woman, she'll die under her brother's-in-law's roof unwanted. Julian set down his glass. The footman flinched at the small hard sound of it. He crossed the ballroom. He was aware of every eye turning as he went, of the music stumbling and recovering, of the sudden hush that spread from him outward like ice on a pond. Dukes did not walk across ballrooms toward corners. Dukes were walked toward. Eleanor did not see him at first. She was watching her youngest sister dance, and there was no envy in her face, only a tired tenderness, the look of a woman who has spent herself entirely on people who have forgotten to thank her. Then his shadow fell over her plate, and she looked up. He watched recognition arrive. Watched her go still. "You," she said quietly. "The man with the broken wheel, the same." He inclined his head. "Though I gave you my name incompletely that day, it seemed unkind to burden a stranger with the whole of it." Behind him the room had gone entirely silent. He heard Lady Prescott's fan snap shut. "I am Julian Hartwell," he said, "Duke of Fallowmere." Something crossed Eleanor's face, not the flutter he saw in every other woman when his title was spoken, but a kind of quiet closing, as of a door drawn gently to. "Then I spoke very freely to a duke," she said, "and told him a great deal of foolishness about expecting nothing. I ask your pardon." "It was the truest thing anyone has said to me in 10 years, Julian answered. "I have thought of it every day since." He was conscious of her brothers-in-law converging, 3 lords in 3 fine coats, scenting advantage, their faces rearranging themselves from contempt to calculation with a speed that turned his stomach. The eldest, Lord Marbury, arrived first, bowing so low his nose nearly grazed his knee. "Your Grace honours this house beyond its deserving," Marbury said. "Had we known you were acquainted with the family, we should have." "Eleanor, why did you not say the Duke had called? Come, come, you must not keep his Grace standing. Give him your chair, girl." "She will keep her chair," Julian said. The words fell like a dropped stone. Marbury's smile froze on his face. "I came a great distance tonight," Julian went on, still looking only at Eleanor, "and I confess I came for one purpose, though I told myself a dozen politer reasons on the road. I came because a fortnight ago a woman with mud on her hem told me how to be disappointed less, and I have been unable to stop wishing to disappoint her instead, pleasantly, and for the rest of my life." A gasp went round the room. Eleanor's plate trembled very slightly in her hands. "Your Grace," she said low, "you must not say such things where the whole county can hear them. They will not be kind to me when you have gone. You do not know what it is to be the one left in the corner." "I know exactly what it is," Julian said. "I have sat in that corner all my life with a coronet on my head, and no one ever once came to fetch me out." And then in the great glittering ballroom of Fallowmere, before the assembled cream of 3 counties, the most powerful duke in the north went down on one knee upon the polished floor. The sound the room made was not applause. It was the sharp, involuntary intake of 100 breaths at once, the rustle of 100 silk gowns leaning forward, the small strangled noise of Lady Prescott's fan hitting the parquet. Eleanor's sisters had stopped dancing. Lord Marbury had gone the colour of tallow. Julian took Eleanor's hand, her working hand, the one with the ink stain she had never quite scrubbed away, and held it between both of his own. "Miss Woad," he said. "Eleanor. I have a house too large and too cold, and I have no one in it who tells me the truth. I have watched you give away your portion, your youth, your rightful place, to sisters who let you sit in a corner tonight without so much as a glance. I have watched you do it without bitterness. I do not want a duchess who was raised to want my title. I want the woman who told me to expect nothing. Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life proving your philosophy wrong." For a long moment Eleanor did not answer, and Julian understood that she was not being coy. She was a woman who had been taught by long practice not to reach for anything, because everything she had ever reached for had been given to someone else. He could see the old habit warring in her, the instinct to refuse a gift lest it be snatched back and she be laughed at for having believed in it. "You will regret it," she said at last, very softly, so that only he could hear, "when the newness wears thin. When you see how plain I am at breakfast, how I count the candles to save them, how I cannot flirt or paint or sing. My sisters were the pretty ones, I was the useful one. Men do not fall in love with the useful one. I am not most men," Julian said, "and I have had my fill of pretty. Pretty smiled at my title and never once at me." He tightened his hold on her ink-stained hand. "I do not want to be smiled at. I want to be told the truth over the accounts by a woman who counts the candles. Eleanor, say yes, and I will never let you sit in a corner again as long as I live." He watched the thing happen in her face that he would remember for the rest of his days, the slow, disbelieving unclenching of a heart that had schooled itself never to hope. Her eyes filled. She did not let the tears fall. She was too proud, and he loved her the more for it. "Yes," she whispered. "God help me, yes." Julian rose and drew her up with him, and for one moment they simply stood, the corner woman and the corner duke, in the center of the floor that had never once made room for either of them. Then the room found its voice. Lord Marbury surged forward, all teeth, both hands out. "Your Grace, sister, this is the most joyful. We must announce it at once. We must drink to it. Eleanor, you sly creature, to have kept such an acquaintance secret." "You will not call her sly," Julian said, without heat, and the quiet of his voice was more terrible than a shout. He turned and looked at the three lords and the three sisters ranged behind them, at Lady Prescott retrieving her fan with shaking fingers, at the whole bright, cruel, glittering assembly that had seated Eleanor by the window and stepped over her portion and let her wear last season's gown to her own family's ball. "Some of you," Julian said, pitching his voice, so that every soul in the room could hear it, "have spent this evening pitying this lady. Some of you have spent it mocking her. You called her a spinster. You said she would die unwanted under another man's roof." He drew Eleanor's hand through his arm and covered it with his own. "Understand me. Every acre this family kept, it kept because she balanced its books when her father could not. Every advantageous marriage these ladies made, they made on the dowry she signed away. She has been the roof over all your heads, and you seated her by the window." The silence was absolute. "On Saturday next," he continued, "she becomes the Duchess of Fallowmere. She will walk into every drawing room in 3 counties on my arm, and every one of you who sneered at her tonight will make her the deepest curtsy you own, and she will decide entirely as she pleases whether to remember your kindness or your neglect. I would advise you all to spend the interval discovering some kindness." He turned from them as if they had ceased to exist, which, to him, they had. He looked down at Eleanor. Colour had come up in her face, and something else with it, not triumph, for she was too gentle for triumph, but a dawning wondering ease, as of a woman setting down a weight she had carried so long she had forgotten it was heavy. "Come," he said gently. "You have sat at the edge of enough rooms. Dance with me in the middle of this one." "I told you," she murmured, even as she let him lead her out, "I cannot dance. There was never anyone to teach me. My sisters had the dancing master. I had the ledgers." "Then I shall teach you badly," Julian said, "and we shall both look foolish, and I find I do not care in the least." And he did teach her, there in the great ballroom of Fallowmere, the two of them turning slowly and imperfectly while the finest musicians in the north played, and the finest families in the north stood mute and watching. She trod on his boot and flushed scarlet and began to laugh, a real laugh, startled out of her, the laugh of a girl who had not been allowed to be a girl. Julian, holding her, felt the last cold room inside his own chest fill up with light. They were married on the Saturday, as he had promised, in the little church at the edge of the Fallowmere land, and if the three sisters wept through the ceremony, it was noticed that their tears began only once they saw the size of the estate their brother-in-law commanded. But Eleanor did not become a stranger to them in the end. That was the thing Julian came to understand about the woman he had married. She had no talent for revenge. When Lord Marbury's harvest failed the second winter, it was Eleanor who quietly sent the grain. When her youngest sister's husband gambled away their London house, it was Eleanor who found them a cottage on the Fallowmere land and never once mentioned the ball. Julian would have let them freeze. She would not, and slowly he came to see that this incapacity for cruelty, even toward the cruel, was the very thing that made her worth kneeling for. "You are too good to them," he told her once, watching her direct a cart of coal toward Marbury's chilly house. "I know what the corner feels like," Eleanor said simply, tucking the ledger under her arm. "I would not wish it on anyone, not even them." Julian looked at his wife, at the ink stain she still had not scrubbed away, at the plain face that was the dearest thing in all his lands, at the woman a whole county had left by the window, and thought that he had spent his life being told what a duke could not do. A duke could not kneel. A duke could not marry the spinster. A duke could not love the useful one. He had done all three, and he had never in his life been so rich. "Come inside, Duchess," he said, and offered her his arm in the middle of the room, where he meant to keep her all his days. "It grows cold." And Eleanor Hartwell, 7th Duchess of Fallowmere, who had once told a dusty stranger to expect nothing and thereby never be disappointed, took her husband's arm and let herself at last expect everything.